Will we ever have an AI for president? In this episode of the podcast, I speak with AI researcher Pedro Domingos from the University of Washington. Pedro wrote the book 2040, which is an Orwellian satire of the current state of America. We discuss the absurdities of our current society, from tech giants and AI hype to the invasion of mainstream dialogue by populism and kooky political ideas. I highly recommend watching this one to the end. As the conversation builds, we discuss how democracies malfunction, AI ethics and regulation, the emergence of digital twins, and who really holds power in today's society. If you value these conversations, please support them by subscribing. And now, here's Pedro Domingos. I hope you enjoy.
Escaped Sapiens.
I want to start with a big question, and one that's related to your new book. And that is, given the advances in AI, do you think it's inevitable, whether it's tomorrow or 100 years from now, do you think it's inevitable that eventually artificial intelligence takes over our governments, militaries, economies, and all elements of our control and decision-making infrastructure?
No. So first of all, I think let me parse that into two different things, I think. One is, will we get super intelligence at some point in the future? I think it's very likely that we will. It's not impossible that we won't, because, for example, the problem is just too hard and we'll never get there, and other whatever things will happen first. But I think it's overwhelmingly likely that we will get super intelligence. And that will be, of course, a huge change to, a lot of things, society, the economy, and whatnot. How soon that will happen is very unclear. I usually say a century, give or take an order of magnitude. So anything between 10 years and 1,000, I think those are good error bars. So they're very large. That's the point. But I think even if and when that happens, or better, as that happens, right, we're going to get more and more AI. It's going to be better and better. And the question is, what difference is that going to make? I don't think that AI is going to take everything over, in the sense that AI will just be making all the decisions by itself. I think what we're going to have is a very intricate and interesting mix of decision making, interspersing humans and machines all along, from the very top to the smallest things. I think the biggest decisions are always going to be made by us, because they're the decisions about what we want, and only we can make them. The AIs can advise us. They will try to influence on each other's behalf, like they already do. And then how those things get implemented, I think in many cases we will defer to the AI, because we have come to trust it. Some things, and again, this is what happens today with companies like Google and Amazon. A lot of the day-to-day decisions are made by AI because that's the only way they can be made. But I think it's going to be a very interesting mix, and that's part of the, what we have to figure out, and what's interesting about things are going to play out is like what that mix is going to be.
But do you think, as time goes on and we defer more and more, there's really a difference, right, between the AI being in control and because if we're deferring all of our decision making to the data coming in, that's sort of like them being in control, right?
Fair question. Think about the following. There are let's say there's 100 million books out there, right? And you're in your life, you're going to read a few thousand of them. And let's say you rely on things like the Amazon recommender system. It is true that the Amazon recommender system already filters out 99% of them for you. So by that measure, the AI is doing most of the decision. But the thing is, like, there is no other way. We can walk around the bookstore in an afternoon. We can't walk around Amazon in an afternoon. But at the end of the day, out of the hundreds of things that it recommends you, the ones that you actually do read are decided by you. This is one aspect. Another one is that, and I think this is a larger theme, we have to stop thinking in terms of the AI versus us. I really like the concept that they have in the chess community of the centaur. A centaur is half human, half machine. In there, it's like inspired by the mythical centaur, except now it's a machine instead of a horse. It's that the AI is an extension of you, right? The AI is what, Richard Dawkins calls the extended phenotype. It's like, the phenotype is your body, which is an extension of your genes. And now there's an even bigger extension, which is the technology. And AI, of course, is the most advanced of the technology. But at the end of the day, the locus of control, there's many layers of control, but it's your genes have given up a lot of control to your brain, right? Think about it, right? But yet your genes still control your brain via your emotions. So I think AI and us is going to be a little bit like that.
So AI is like the emotions that are being flooded into our brain stems.
No, so very important question. So the analogy here is we are the genes, right? The AI is your brain, and the brain is incredibly powerful because it can learn daily, it can make decisions in the moment, which the genes can't. The danger of that is the brain goes off and do something that absolutely does not serve the genes. The way in which the genes control the brain is by emotions. The way we control AI systems is by their objective functions, by the reward functions, which again is exactly a term inspired by psychology, by animal psychology. So we have reward functions, pleasure and pain. The AIs have reward functions too. So we're actually using the same mechanism to control them that the genes use to control us.
One of the interesting aspects of the story I find is that every time we've had technological advances, it's led to new forms of government, right? So without religion, we may not have had large organized states at all. Then we have the printing press and the radio. What influence do you think AI is going to have on the sorts of governments we can actually form in the future, moving forwards?
Exactly. I think this is one of the most important issues about AI and one of the least talked about. In fact, in terms of importance to exposure, this is probably the winner. I think it's inconceivable that AI, if it's bigger than the wheel and fire, like Tsunami Pichai says, will not have major effects in how society is governed. And in fact, 2040, the book, satirical aspects aside, is exactly an illustration of this. So it's this chatbot that runs for president. The first version called Prezibot. Prezibot 1.0 is ChatGPT, right? Or today's chatbots. Prezibot 2.0 is my vision of how I think AI can and should be governed. And there's a few key ideas here, but one of them is that we I mean, actually, let me the novel Not Accidentally is a good illustration of this. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, this is probably a good idea to start off with more of a synopsis of the book. But so for people who haven't read it yet, could you give, before we jump in, can you give sort of a brief overview of what it is and what you wrote?
Absolutely. And in fact, you're right. This will then set the stage for what we're discussing. So what happens in 2040 is that it's the story of the 2040 presidential election, where one of the candidates is a chatbot in a robot body. And what happens is that there's a couple of grad students at Stanford who invented a new algorithm that they think solves AI because we all do that. And then they formed this, startup called Kumbaya, which is a spoof of OpenAI. Ethan, who's the protagonist, is the CEO of the company, and he's a spoof of Sam Altman with elements of Travis Kalanick and others. And they, what happens is that their startup is not doing very well, and they're trying to find a good stunt to get publicity, which again is what AI companies do. Every element of the book is there to illustrate an element of reality in today, right? So 2040 is not about 2040 any more than Animal Farm is about animals or farming. It's a caricature of today. So they formed this company, which is a spoof of OpenAI, and then there are these Supreme Court decisions, and then one drunken night, Ethan, who's the more megalomaniac, there's also the CTO, his friend Arvind. Arvind says, well, at this point, an AI could run for president, and Ethan goes, yeah. That's what we have to do. So they do as a stunt. And their goal is to then sell CEOs to companies and things like that, based on their chatbot, having been, gotten all this exposure. But then there's a surprise, which is this libertarian trillionaire, which you can easily guess who he's spoofing, decides to bankroll Prezibot, the campaign, and Prezibot wins the Republican primary. Also because it's the only moderate in the field of all populists. And then they have this moment where, oh my God, we're in the general election. So this is a dozen-person, bumbling startup. But then if they lose the election, the other candidate is a fake Lakota chief who wants to abolish the United States. So if they fail, it's the end of America. On the other hand, the other candidate comes and attacks them on the, Terminator line that this is going to be the extinction of humanity. So the dilemma, as one, random character that Ethan asks at one point, like, who you going to vote for? He says, well, if I vote for Raging Bull, the fake Lakota candidate, it's the end of America. But if I vote for Prezibot, it's the end of humanity, so I have to choose the least of evils. So this is the setup. Now, most of the novel, and relevant to the point that we were just talking about, the MacGuffin in the novel is that Prezibot has a kill switch. A kill switch is this thing that a lot of people have advocated that AIs should have. And in fact, there's papers written about it. And this, new bill in California that, may soon, become law. It says it mandates that every AI must have a kill switch. So a kill switch is if the AI starts to misbehave in any way, you can take control of it, either shut it down or start controlling it directly. And what could possibly go wrong? Well, the novel is about what could go wrong. So Ethan has a kill switch, which is basically an app that Arvind, the CTO, quickly coded up. But then he loses the kill switch. He misplaces it. And the middle part of the novel is this odyssey that he goes through to try to retrieve the kill switch. And then there's various people, various groups of people fighting for control of for possession of the kill switch, which of course both illustrates the dangers of kill switches. Like, so who's going to control the kill switch? And who's, what are they going to do with it? But also is the setup for Ethan having this realization that, well, if everybody's fighting over the kill switch, this being a democracy, maybe what we should do is give everybody a kill switch. So what they do is they turn the kill switch into something called Prezi app, and Prezibot 2.0 is crowdsourced in real time. So what happens with Prezibot 2.0 is that like everybody has an app called Prezi app where they can start talking to Prezibot and saying what they want, what they think it should do, well, how they think it should answer questions. And then what happens in the data center, so like Prezibot in reality is this vast data center, which occupies the entire underground of San Francisco, where this takes place. And there's even homeless people living in the data center, but which also then, who also end up playing an important part. But Prezibot 2.0 is real-time crowdsourced AI. And at the end of the day, and it has its own pitfalls, which the book also illustrates, but at the end of the day, this is just a much better kind of democratic decision-making than we have today, right? The democracy that we have today is based on 18th century technology, right? The paradox that we live in today is the Googles and Amazons get megabytes of information from you every day, and your representative, which, in the US, like my representative represents 700,000 other people, gets one bit of information from me every 2 years in the form of a vote. This is just ridiculous. So contrast that with Prezibot, it's like dragging, democracy into the 21st century.
My first question, I asked whether you think AI will eventually take over our infrastructure, our decision and control infrastructure, and you said no. But yet here in the book, you have Prezibot, right? You have a story, a satire, where the control infrastructure is taken over. So why did you write this if you don't think this is going to happen?
But you just made a very important distinction there, which is there's control and there's control infrastructure. Precisely what Prezibot provides is the control infrastructure, but not the control. In the same way that, like, platforms, like, think about it this way. The big companies, tech companies today, they're big because they're platforms, right? Facebook is a platform, right? But the platform just provides the means, or, Amazon is a platform. It provides the means for buyers and sellers to find each other. It doesn't decide what is bought and sold. So there's this very important concept in economics and in the area of mechanism design, right? And the Constitution is a piece of mechanism design. It says what is the process by which we make decisions as a society. So Prezibot 2.0 is just a better mechanism. So the mechanism does not make the decisions. Of course, how the mechanism is designed can greatly affect the decisions. And of course, this is something that we're going to have to fight a lot about. Also, if you're in control of the platform, you could make it, you could use it for bad things, and that's another problem. But the platform per se is not the locus of control. It's the infrastructure of control. And these, to your question, like, why did I write this book? Is that, I mean, I wrote a previous book that was very successful, the master algorithm, and it has a chapter about, the future of various things now that there's, AI is where it is. One of them is politics. But here's the thing, at the end of the day, what I felt is that some of these concepts are not obvious, but they're extremely important. a novel, there's nothing better at the end of the day to make people see something than writing a story that illustrates the point. So that's what I'm trying to do here. I think at the end of the day, this works better than writing 500 pages explaining the concept of collective intelligence and AI augmented democracy and whatnot.
Another thing that I found quite interesting about your book when I read it is that it's quite pessimistic, right? You paint this future, which is really a dystopia. And you sort of, Wokism plays a big role in the book as well, maybe more than Prezibot, right? Prezibot is almost not present in the book, right? There's definitely no personality there. It's really displayed as a machine. So what are you trying to sell here? So you're trying to you're trying to shine light on today's society, right? Rather than AI. What is the actual message you're trying to get across?
Right, so a couple of things. First of all, as you very astutely noticed, Prezibot is a non-character by design. The whole point of Prezibot is to seem like a character but not be one. Because one of the highest level goals of the book is that I want to, people have this natural misconception of AI as Terminator. AI is not Terminator. AI is not a robot or a super intelligence with evil designs coming to kill us. This is anthropomorphizing AI. So if the only thing that the book does is that when people have read it, instead, when they picture AI, instead of picturing Terminator, they picture Prezibot, the job is already done, right? We see Prezibot being programmed and repaired and whatnot by the human beings. And again, it's clear that Prezibot itself is not in control of anything. The fight is for control of it. So on purpose, Prezibot is not a character. In fact, I make a point of always referring to it as it, right? So somebody interviewed me and says, so what are, jokingly, so what are Prezibot's pronouns? And I had to laugh because it was very appropriate. And I said, Prezibot 1.0's pronouns are it and its. Prezibot 2.0's pronouns are we and us. That's the big change. It goes from being an it to being an us. Prezibot 2.0 is us, interacting in a way that we didn't before. So this is one of the things that I want to do. As you very well point out, the book is quite dystopian, and there's an element of book that is a satire of Wokism, because the book takes place in 2040 in a society where Wokism has prevailed, and now we see what that has resulted in. And the result, honestly, is not very good. I'm very critical of Wokism, and again, I think a satire is a very classical way to criticize a regime in a way that is kind of not that is subtle in many ways, right? It's you're just showing this to people, and the book is actually doing something that is very traditional in science fiction, which is take current trends and extrapolate them to the limit. So I take the logic of Wokism, and for example, why does Raging Bull want to abolish America? Because that's the logic, this colonist shouldn't be here, right? And so he wants to replace America by a federation of indigenous nations. And now your house is on some indigenous nation's land, and they decide what happens. Like, this is, again, a lot of people, when they read the book, they say like, wow, this is so far out, but at the same time, it's oddly realistic, which is the point. So the reason the book is dystopian is that it's a warning. I'm painting 2040 like this so that it's not. So the success of the book will be if the real 2040 is the complete opposite of what the book describes.
So then how do you avoid the dystopia? You're not a fan of regulation, right? So no. How do we pay the path that avoids the dystopian future where Wokism has taken over without regulation?
Great question. So there's a number of ways, but I would say the single most important and neglected one is precisely that we need to change how our democracy functions. Right now, what we're seeing, and we've seen examples of this before with previous technologies, that there is this new reality of social media and et cetera, the internet, and our institutions are not suited to this. And so the people feel neglected. They feel that their voice isn't heard. Populism is on the rise, et cetera, right? And these are all malfunctions of democracy. And the question is like, how do we fix these malfunctions? Also, people's level of demand has gone up, which is good, right? People expect a degree of say today that they didn't 100 or 200 years ago, but they can have it now. So we need to change our democracy. And, one way to approach, Prezibot 2.0 is from social media. Social media right now is this jungle and has all these bad influences and whatnot. Also some good ones that don't get as much airplay, but nevertheless, Think of how you would organize social media in order to produce better outcomes instead of just maximize engagement, right? So I think the technology can really help. Again, we need better mechanism designs. We need to design these social technical systems, not just with a view to making a profit, but with a view to making democracy function better. So this is a very important aspect. It's not the only one. I think the other big element I would say is the people need to be better. We, the people, need to be better educated and informed. And my goal with both my previous book, The Master Algorithm, and this one, at the end of the day, is really to just give people a better understanding of what the technology is and what they can do with it. Because again, what history shows us over and over again is a new technology. It changes who has power in society. The people who know how to use the technology get more power and the other ones don't. So which one do you want to be? One of the ones with more power, the ones with less. So I think that's also something that we very much need to do.
A problem with this technology that I see is that compute and data are really controlled by large corporations. At least that's what it looks like today, right? And so is this technology something that's going to benefit centralized power or distribution of power?
Yeah, that's a great question. In fact, what we see today, and we'll probably see more of that on even a great scale with AI, and again, I understand why this confuses people, is that on the one hand, we do have these companies that are very large, the platforms, the Googles, the Metas, the Amazons. And you could say, oh, look, the control is so centralized. But at the same time, and this is actually what is less appreciated at the end of the day, much more important, these platforms make the world far more decentralized than ever before. Anybody can buy and sell on Amazon. There's no barrier anymore. There's no choke point. Like I can make little handcrafts that, before I would have not enough of a buying public in my town for, and I sell them all over the world. I can have a blog, I can have a Substack, I can have everybody can have a voice because Google, if it does its job well, will let the readers and the writers find themselves. So in a way, the world is this, look at the world 50 years ago. There are, a few TV networks and publishers and whatnot. The world is dramatically more decentralized today than it was before. And Prezibot 3.0 will be that even more, right? Again, that potential for people having a bigger say and things being more decentralized is not yet fully realized, and we are going through these growing pains. Now, the platform, so like a platform, right, has network effects which are very beneficial. It does create the danger of there being too much power in one place. But on the other, honestly, I think these days the tech companies like the Googles and Metas, etc., they get a worse rap than they deserve, because at the end of the day they also have to compete with each other, and they also have to serve you, right? It's the invisible hand is still at work here, right? Google can't just get away with anything. Now, having said that, Google can, and in fact, in many ways, does already have a bad effect, because there's this very fuzzy line between being a platform and being actually the producer and controller of content. And when they cross this, and for example, when it comes to regulatory regimes, being a platform is one thing. Being a publisher, when your ranking algorithm starts to decide who, this decision is inevitably loaded, right? So there is both decentralization and centralization. The centralization component, we do need to keep our eye on it, because things can go wrong there.
The example that you gave of Amazon, right? It's true that you can sell your product on Amazon across the world, but as soon as you become a little bit more profitable than they would like, they will create their own native product, right? And push you out of the market. That tends to be what happens on Amazon. So,
well, good example, right? Store brands, right? Store brands didn't kill the brands, right? The people who want to buy store brands, but most people actually still don't, right? It has to do with how price conscious you are and whatnot. But, an even better example, Amazon actually does not do that with most things, because they don't want to. It's not worth their while, right? Like, one of their biggest profit makers is the marketplace that they create. Number two. And number three, there's Shopify. If you don't like Amazon, you go on Shopify, right? Shopify will provide all the infrastructure that Amazon provides, but they don't put their name on it. And, Shopify is giving Amazon a run for their money.
One of the concerns that I have is that AI, to a certain extent, will kill the internet. right? Because at the moment I'm speaking directly with you, and on Twitter or whatever social media platform you use, you interact with people directly. But more and more, I imagine our interactions are going to be mediated by the AI. So eventually it might be the case that I no longer Google things, but I just ask an AI, give me the answer to this question. And so there'll be some AI wall or barrier that's put up between everyone until everyone just has their own personalized AI, and there's no longer, we no longer have the information superhighway. We have these, little boxes around everyone. What impact do you think AI is going to have on the internet as time moves on? Is this sort of the future that we can expect?
So I think some of that will happen, and if it's done well, it's a good thing. Right? It's interesting that you think of it as AI killing the internet. I actually think think of the internet as the brain of humanity. And what happens is that humanity only has a brainstem in some sense, or a cerebellum at best. The neocortex is still missing. AI is going to be the neocortex of the internet, and it can't come soon enough, honestly, right? So I really think like the growing pains that we're going through right now as an information society are precisely because in some sense, all that information is already coming in. That's great, right? We got the brainstem, or the thalamus, right? Which is the, controls the communication switch of the brain. But the intelligence to deal with that is not there. So having better intelligence, I think, will be good. I think we will have these, I often say that like AI is like power steering for the mind, right? We are going to have this AI shell, if you will, that communicates with the world on our behalf. Most of the communication, I don't even know about it. I say I want a new job. Go out and find possible new jobs for me. It does very complicated interactions with LinkedIn and companies and whatnot. And then it says, look, here are the 100 jobs that you really, want to look at. But then at the end of the day, I'm still going to interact with a bunch of people live, partly because we want to, right? Like human beings are never going to give up interacting directly with each other, right? Like that's, but also because at the end of the day, there's a level of decision making which at the end can only be made that way. So, for example, one of the examples that I had in the master algorithm that became very popular. Some people even say there's an episode of Black Mirror that was inspired by it. It may have been, it was the Hang the DJ episode, which is about the future of dating, right? And what I advocate is that the future of dating is you have a digital twin that goes on 1 million dates with 1 million people, right? That's the only good way to do that, right? Everybody in your city or metro area, your bot has dated their bot. But then at the end of the day, the whole point of that is to say, look, like here is to, for example, have a party where your 100 most promising, romantic partners, your 100 worst competitors are all there, right? But then there's still the party, right? People don't decide to get together just because the algorithm said so. It's a step.
I mean, this is already happening, right? The
Yeah,
algorithm,
exactly. Yeah.
I mean, on Tinder, you get matched up with a certain subset of the population. You might not even know, but your future wife is really selected for you to a large extent.
Yes. I mean, no, let me go further. Most marriages in America, at least for the last 20 years, started on the internet. So there are children alive today who would not exist if the algorithm hadn't matched their parents. But my point is that, I mean, if you follow these things, people these days are very disappointed with these, matching algorithms because they invest an enormous amount of effort for very poor results. And the reason precisely is that the algorithms that they're using right now are very crude. And my argument is that at the end of the day, there is no substitution for a natural interaction, right? Like the same two people could have a conversation when they first meet that goes off the rails and they hate each other, right? This is really the plot of Pride and Prejudice, right? Or they could hit it off and fall in love immediately and whatnot, right? And so what I'm saying is like, what you actually need is, first of all, is a good enough model of you that was created for a lot of purposes, not just this one, including being your representative in politics, right? But then your models, they go on dates and you see like, look, with this person, 99% of your dates went really well. So do you want to meet them in real life? This will just give way better results than the algorithms that we have today in the likes of Tinder and OkCupid and whatnot.
I see. And so your point is further that there'll be a model of me that can go on 1 million dates, but also a model of me that can be represented in parliament and make higher level decisions that will affect my life on a broader scale.
And that goes job hunting, and that gets interviewed at companies, right? The job market. And again, LinkedIn already does this kind of thing. If you're a company and you pay, LinkedIn will mine the resumes of everybody to the ones, using machine learning algorithms is like, these look like the ones that you want. And again, the same principle applies here is that like what we're going to have is like everybody in the job market is going to get interviewed by every company. Some of these interviews will be very quick because there's clearly not a match. And some of them could actually be quite deep. And at some point, it was like, okay, you guys should actually talk in real life. This is how almost everything's going to happen. I need a lawyer. I'm a producer of something and I need to buy some part. Like we're going to have this staff, if you will, of bazillions of AI agents. It will be like being super rich, right? If you're Bill Gates, you have 100 people working for you. But in the future, you and I will have 100 million of these AI agents working for us. And in fact, in the master algorithm, I have a section called a society of models. And this is where I think where we're going. We're going to have a society of models. It's like, like the subconscious of society is going to be all these algorithms, all these models doing all these things. And then the conscious part is the few things that actually rise to the level of our conscious attention, which again is what happens in your brain, right? Most of what you do is in your subconscious.
One thing that I find quite interesting here is that for the algorithms to be successful, they need to have a good qualitative and quantitative picture of who I am as an individual, even today, right? With our, let's say, basic algorithms. Do you think the technology is going to make social sciences an exact or hard science like mathematics or physics or chemistry?
Great question. I think it's going to make, for example, sociology a lot more like a physical science. And in fact, we already see some of that happening. But there's a few caveats here. One is that it can't do that without the data, right? Why did physics take off first? Because you can do experiments, rolling things on inclined planes and dropping them from the Tower of Pisa and whatnot. That will actually let you get at the laws. The laws are that simple. The problem with sociology and psychology and economics, social science, the phenomena are so complex that until recently we just didn't have the data commensurate with the complexity of the phenomena. Now we do, but number one, there's a big barrier, which is everybody's obsessed with withholding the data. The discussion is all about privacy. This is one of the really big things that we have to get over is like, we will not reap the benefits of AI until we change our minds about sharing data. Sharing data is, for example, this is a very salient example, curing cancer. Cancer researchers say with data from all the patients and AI, we can cure cancer, and without it, we can't. As a cancer patient, you have a moral duty to contribute your data, properly anonymized and all that, to cure, other people's cancers, maybe your own or your family members' cancers again in the future. We're not sharing data enough. And now there's a lot. So this is one aspect. Now, there's, of course, people have this fear that your data will be used against you. So we need the control structures, and there will be fights in society. Like, again, one of the things that I mentioned in the algorithm and is also a popular idea, but hasn't really come to pass is people should, for example, form data unions. You and I are like-minded, and then just like labor unions were created to even the balance of power between the bosses and the workers, we can create data unions to even the balance of power between us and the Googles and the Facebooks. We mine data about these companies together, right? Or about other groups. So this is not, this is not a naive little vision of like, oh, we all share data and kumbaya, right? Again, the company is called kumbaya because things do not turn out kumbaya at all, right? Like it's also a spoof of naive, technology, technocracy, if you will. So this is one aspect. We need the data, control of this is not going to be trivial. But then, even abstracting from all of that, at the end of the day, and we understand this very well right now, societies are chaotic systems. So there's an irreducible amount of uncertainty and unpredictability that even with the best data and the best algorithms, we will always have. Okay. But, I'll be glad when we get to that point. We're far from it now. We also need better machine learning algorithms to be able to do this kind of modeling at the social level. These things are all developing. The algorithms can't develop without the data, and there's no need to collect the data. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem. I do think that the biggest barrier right now is actually not on the research side, is on the social side of people just, changing their, we need to change the conversation from privacy to data sharing is what needs to happen.
I think one of the major concerns that people will have is that you don't know how data is going to be used in the future, right? So to bring up maybe a crass example, before the Second World War, people would register their religion, right, in Germany. And so that came back to bite certain subsections of the population quite hard. And so it was not obvious in any way that this was going to be problematic for these people in the future, at least to the extent that it was. And so, you know, how do you deal with the fact that there are unknown unknowns when it comes to data sharing?
No, so this is a perfectly valid concern. And indeed, the example is even, in particular, for example, the Netherlands, they actually had a very good registry that other countries didn't have. So they had their data act together, right? Which the Nazis would then use to find all the Jews and kill them, right? So you're right. And a lot of people worry about this. But again, I think, we can't predict everything that's going to happen in the future. But just to take, for example, the cancer example, we can anonymize the data, right? So there's this whole field called federated learning, where you do machine learning, which is my specialty, while not having to consolidate or access all the data. So, for example, your very concrete example, you have an AI that is under your control and nobody else's, that learns the model of you. Your digital twin is 100% under your control by law. The fiduciary duty of that AI is to act on your behalf. No more, no less. Okay. And then it gathers all the data about you and whatnot. But that agent is under your control. You can shut it down anytime that you want. People can try to capture it and whatnot, but that's no different from trying to capture you personally, right? And in federated learning, again, there's a lot of work on this. You know, companies like Apple and whatnot are big on it. You have a model of the population that is learned not directly from the data, but from, like, your iPhone learned the model of you. My iPhone learned the model of me, right? And then that model, at least certain parameters of the model that are okay to share, are actually what gets consolidated by Apple into a model of everybody, right? And you can have many different levels. It's like a whole graph of where the models are. So we need to thoughtfully design, the system of how data is shared, right? Focusing on data sharing doesn't mean share all your data with everybody. It means being conscious about what you share with whom for what purpose, right? And, there are risks. I mean, at the end of the day, despite examples like the Netherlands and versus, for example, France in World War II, it's a good thing to have records, right? America doesn't have a national ID system, and honestly, it's ridiculous, the crap that we have to deal with because of that, right? Same with Britain, right? So, I'm as much for freedom as everybody else, but some of it gets back to a point which we haven't talked about, which is extremely important, which is trust. A lot of the complaints and issues that people are raising about AI, the problem is that they don't trust who's going to be using the AI. So there's nothing more important than trust. It's really not about privacy, it's about trust. I think a good analogy is people used to put their money under the mattress because they didn't trust the banks. It's like, oh, they're going to run away with my money, right? And this now is ridiculous. The banks don't run away with your money for various reasons. It's not in their interest, among other things. But really what we're doing today is we're putting our data under the mattress. What we want is these data unions or data banks or whatever to invest our data on our behalf to give us the maximum returns, which is what the banks do with our money. People are going to look back on today the same way we look at that fool putting their money under the mattress.
I suppose one thing that we have going in our favor here is that, back in the 30s, they would have had lists written down that you can go and you can read and see that little piece of information about so-and-so. Here, you can't really look into the AI, right? The information is stored in some weights within some large neural network. I suppose data might be kept safe through that sort of a mechanism, right?
Well, you're conflating two different things there. It is true that today's neural networks, large language models, are very opaque. This is actually a big downside. Making them opaque just makes them harder to improve, to control, to use, et cetera, to trust, right? You don't trust them because you don't know you don't know if they're making stuff up. So the opacity is actually a big negative, but there are lots of AI types, right? Again, mass algorithm is about the 5 tribes. The deep learning is one of them. The 4 others are not opaque. Symbolic AI, Bayesian, AI, et cetera, they don't have that opacity problem. And I think the neural networks of the future will also not have that opacity problem either. The point of superintelligence is to handle things that are more complex than we can, like the biology of cancer, for example, or how your whole body works. So some of that difficulty in understanding may be reducible, but that's okay. That's why we have the AI. But we do want to get rid of all the unnecessary opacity now. To I think what is your main point? Sometimes you want opacity. So the idea in federated learning, for example, is to be opaque by design, right? And there's this whole field called homomorphic cryptography where the computations are done on your data without ever decrypting it. So we can by design say this data, the data of source A, when used by use B, is encrypted or fudged or camouflaged as follows. We have complete freedom, and there's tons of algorithm research, etc., on how to do this. Right? The control can be centralized, distributed, and whatnot. And we do want that. You can say, like, well, for my doctor can have all my health data, like, from beginning to end, because I trust them. Because if I don't trust them, then, I'm host anyway. This other blah, blah, well, they can have this data. And again, one of the things that your digital twin is going to do on your behalf is negotiate all of this. Like you said, like, well, I want this data from you. And you're like, well, what do you really want it for? And you go like, well, I need it for this. And I'm like, okay, but it's under this condition that you don't share. So like this all will be, like, a large part of society and the economy will consist of these negotiations and decisions and how to use AI and what data to allow for what and whatnot.
An interesting thing that you point out is that it might become a moral good to share your data in the future, right? So something that you talk about is the back reaction that AI is going to have on our morals and ethics. What impact do you think it is going to have? So what is the future going to look like in terms of our morals and ethics? And what are our future selves going to look like, look back on us and think, that is just so archaic and we can't believe they acted in that way or had those beliefs?
Exactly. So I think, again, there's this whole field these days of AI ethics. But what all the people in this field seem to be doing is trying to shoehorn AI into our current ethical views, which if you take seriously the idea that AI is going to change societies, come on, then we're going to have different ethical views 50 or 100 years from now. And as you say, people, just as we look back on the people in the 19th century and go like, oh my God, slavery and the oppression of women, are like, what the heck were they thinking? They're going to look back on us and say like, what the heck were they thinking? And I think what we should be trying to figure out is like, what are those things, right? And in fact, you just mentioned one of them. It's interesting that you said, it may be that in the future, people will have a moral duty to share their data. No, they have that moral duty right now. We're trying to cure cancer right now. We're trying to improve society right now. We're trying to run our cities right now. We have a moral duty to share our data today. So this is one of the things. But to make a more general point, I think what's going to happen is the ethical principles by which we run society are going to change. And some of it is going to be, again, we just have to learn from history and see what happened before, right? With the transition, for example, from feudalism to, for example, right? Here's a simple example, the printing press, right? Look at the printing press, just one invention. And why did that change society? Because now the people no longer had access to the Bible only through the priest, right? That choke point has gone away. And this is really the source of Protestantism. Like, no, everybody gets to read the Bible and interpret for themselves. And this completely changes the power structure. In fact, I come from a Catholic country, honestly, unfortunately, because I think Protestantism was a great advance, right? America is a child of all that, right? The Enlightenment, and this was the printing press, right? Now imagine AI, right? AI is going to dramatically change how we organize society and what we think is right and wrong. And, you can go to almost every field and speculate like, how will AI change how we think there? And I think it's very important to do that speculation and have those discussions. The problem, and I've been trying to do this, but the problem, and a number of people find this very interesting, but another number, I would say probably larger, go like, hell no, my ethical principles are the right ones, and you're evil for even suggesting that. Because like every, religion or ideology, you have to pretend that you're absolute or you lose your credibilities. But so as soon as we start to think about these things, it all starts to crumble. Let me give you, I mean, we could spend a long time on this, but let me give you just one small example that I think is very illustrative. The problem of trolleyology, right? Very, very popular philosophists. With philosophists as well.
This is the trolley problem where you decide whether it's going to run over 3 people or one and so on.
Yeah. Exactly. So, and this is these days called trolleyology, right? Which started out as humorous, but I guess it still is. But anyway, you can pose all these dilemmas about like, should the trolley run over the old person or the young one, the person with the high income or low, like blah blah blah, right? But now there is AI trolleyology because we have self-driving cars, and the self-driving cars have to decide what to do, which forces us to confront how we make decisions. And what happens a lot today, and has always happened through our history, that would confuse an AI a lot, is that we say one thing and we do another. So if we try to program into the self-driving car our rules of of the greater good, whatever moral system you have, first of all, it's impossible to do that, right? So for the same reasons that it's impossible to solve AI by rules, as we learned in the 80s, if you now try to learn from examples, you see that people aren't following these things, right? So, for example, right, that's the thing, right? And today's self-driving cars are super boring. They like your grandma. Everybody steps all over them because they don't play that game of chicken that you have to play when you're driving. So, we're going to have to confront the following thing: is do we admit that this is how we really act? Because it's like once we tell the cars to, if we don't tell the cars to act this way, they're just useless. And same with a lot of other technology. But if we tell them to act this way, we have to stop pretending that we actually act this way. So I mean, like people have done these surveys, and one of them was like, do you think, for example, if the car is, barreling down a bridge and is going to kill someone, but can jump over the railing and kill the driver, to save 10 people, should it kill the driver, right? And people say like, yeah, it should. But if they're the driver, they say no. So I think what's going to happen is things like this is like, there's going to be a law that says self-driving cars must sacrifice the driver, when it saves a greater number of people, et cetera, et cetera. But then there's going to be an aftermarket of hacks to the AI that then make my car make me live, because the worst thing that happens then is I go to jail. So this is the kind of way that AI is going to change our ethical systems and even our ethical view of ourselves, right? I think solving AI will not just solving, but all progress in AI will force us to confront how we really work, and hopefully we will actually wind up more enlightened than we are now, frankly.
And so we're going to be pulled over in the future by police who are going to look to see whether our self-preservation module has been turned on or something like this.
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, one interesting question in this whole area is like, where's the liability?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Is it going to be with the algorithm or the company or the user?
No, exactly. So, for example, if Waymo runs over somebody in San Francisco, right? Right now, it's Waymo's fault. But the problem is that today, all these AIs only learn in the factory. They don't learn, on a day-to-day basis from the driver. Once my self-driving car starts to learn from me, if it runs somebody over, it's a very, the company will say like, oh, you mistaught your AI. And I say like, no, you, the company. So for example, this transparency that we're talking about is not going to be very important to say like, okay, here's why it made that decision, and here's why the training on my behavior it was influential versus something that the company put in.
So if I go back to the very first question then, so I asked you whether you think AI is eventually going to take over our control and the decision infrastructure. And you said no. There's always, from my understanding, your view is that there's always going to be a person in the loop. And so my follow-up question there would be, does that imply that you think we'll never get to sentience when it comes to AI? We'll never have AGI or beings with a first-person perspective that think they're, a living thing?
No, it doesn't, because sentience and intelligence and control are all different things. So, for example, today, if you employ somebody, right, you're the manager, and I'm the person you're managing. I'm sentient, but at some level, you're controlling what I do. You tell me do this, I decide how I do it, right? But the fact that I'm sentient in no way prevents you from having control. Now, I could, and again, every manager had this problem. I could decide to slack off or not do, right? So there's all these things that can go wrong, right? But AI in that regard is no different from working with a human. Now, will AI ever truly be sentient? That is an interesting philosophical question. I think most AIs don't need to be sentient. An AI to cure cancer is there to solve a problem, is there to do a search in some sense, an optimization, a modeling, etc. Now, an AI like a housebot, for example, is going to have to be very similar to humans. They're going to have these different senses and actuators that by nature have to be similar to ours. They're going to have to be integrated. At some point, this starts to look a lot like sentience. And what's going to happen, in fact, this is already happening famously with Lambda, and even before that with things like Tamagotchis, like people will project sentience onto things that don't have it, right? So as a practical matter, people are just going to treat AIs like they're sentient, for better or worse. And the question of like, what is it really sentient is going to be for philosophers and computer scientists and a few other people like that who are still, and maybe that question is actually unanswerable. Now, the most important question, I think, at the end of the day here is actually control, right? The thing that worries the doomers is that once the AI starts to learn, it slips out of my control and then it can do anything. This is really the crux of the matter. But here's the thing. My AI can be infinitely intelligent and still under my control. I know this is not an intuitive point, but it's actually a very well-grounded point. AI technically is the solution of NP-complete problems using heuristic means. What does that mean? An NP-complete problem, this is really the most important class of problems in computer science, is problems that cannot be solved efficiently. It takes an exponential amount of time to solve them, right? That's what AI is for, as opposed to computer graphics or databases, operating systems that solve the tractable problems. But here's the thing. The other defining characteristic of NP-complete problems is that checking the solution can be done efficiently. The AI can be exponentially more intelligent than us. We just have to be able to check the solutions, right? And I very well can imagine the future humanity 50 years from now, there's 10 billion of us whose entire full-time job is checking the solutions of the AI. So the AI can have an intelligence of exponentially in 10 billion, which is something completely unimaginable, and still be under our control. If the AI whose job is to cure cancer starts to kill people instead, we'll notice, right? So there you go.
Except it might become an ethical question. Do we allow control to something that appears to be sentient? Right? If you go back and you look in the past in America, we used to have slavery, right? The slaves were just as intelligent as you know, the white or the colonists or whatever you want to call the main population. I think you call them colonists in your book, but
that's woke lingo,
right? But so the point is, as soon as the slaves got this sort of the same level of rights that we have, then they can aspire to become the president. They can aspire to become anyone in society. And it might be the same, there might be a similar path for AI, right?
Well, again, there's, I think, a lot of people worried about this, so this is a very good point to bring up. But here's the thing. AIs are not our slaves. And there's a key step there in your argument, which I would submit is a fallacy, which is, just because something is sentient doesn't mean it has rights. Who says?
I mean, we would, right? We would say that it's an ethical or a moral imperative.
Precisely. You know, we were just talking about how AI would change ethics. Ethics is an example. Here's the thing, like we human, like what we believe, I think you and I and most people in our society is like all human beings have the same rights, right? We're all human beings, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot follows from that, in particular, not compatible with feudalism and things like that. But AIs, even if they're sentient, like we now have, so here's the thing, AI forces us to make a lot of distinctions that we didn't have to make before. One of those is the distinction between human and sentient. Humans have rights, sentient entities, you haven't proven to me that these deserve to have rights, right? And what often comes up in these discussions, which goes all the way back to Bentham, which is actually a very good reference in these things, is the capacity to suffer. If you have the capacity to suffer, then you have rights, right? And some people just breeze through this without even realizing that you made that inference. In fact, saying that your rights are a consequence of your capacity to suffer is natural, but is actually a big mistake. Because then what happens is, and again, Wokism is a good example of this, is if I can suffer more than you, I have more rights. If you look at the evolutionary logic of this or the incentive logic of this, like economists do, which I think always look at this, things through the point of view of incentives, whatever you reward, you'll get more of. So now I'm rewarding pain, right? And so, I feel so much pain. Like you got to cater to me, right? The evolutionary purpose of pain is to steer you in the right direction. So no, I don't think suffering is a reason to have rights at all. And with AI, like, first of all, we can, you could say that AI getting a low score on its objective function is its suffering. But honestly, it doesn't have the right to have a high score on its objective function when it does the reinforcement learning to answer my questions well. This is ridiculous. Well, yes, it continues to be ridiculous no matter how sentient the AI gets.
One of the interesting things about our current day democracies is we have checks on power, right? A term will be, say, 4 or 5 years. And then there's the ultimate check on power, which is that we all die. Right? We have this finite time on Earth. You might design a system which is very good, right? It's very good at putting checks and balances in place to stop an AI overtaking and making decisions that we wouldn't want. But an AI doesn't die, right? We have this one, it has this one thing on us that we're never going to be able to catch up on. So is the problem that the future is it's a big open empty space that we can really, there's infinite possibilities more or less for problems.
Well, this is a very interesting question to bring up, but your starting point is actually very ironic because today AIs live a lot less than we do. AIs die all the time. In fact, machine learning is nothing but a sped up evolutionary process. Like when you're doing backprop to train these systems, when you're doing gradient descent, what you're actually doing is in a mathematically efficient way, look at all the possible ways and look at all your offspring of your current model and kill all of them except one of them. So AIs are dying at the rate of trillions per second worldwide if you look at all these data centers. So we have an accelerated evolutionary process basically consisting of massacring AIs by the trillion. Okay. Now, having said that, I could imagine, although that's the polar opposite of today, having an AI, I can very well imagine it, and there's dangers associated with this, which I think is your point. Like I can very well imagine, like, some number of years from now, like America is run by a big AI. Yes, there are all these individual AIs, but at the end of the day, there is one that is the biggest of all, right? And that AI effectively is the government, and we can't function without it. And God forbid we turn it off, right? And now that AI is not going evil, but it's starting to go bad, right? It's suffering from entropy and rigidity and whatnot, because that's what happens to everything and everyone, every company, every organization. Yes, with AI, this will happen slower, but still, it'll probably happen. So we need to actively prevent it from happening. And I think there's a lot of, like in a way, death is the price of evolution. Now, the joke that, like, what I think it was, Haldane that said this, like or some famous evolutionary biologist, like, what does a bacteria want? The bacteria wants to become two bacteria, right? Right. So there's many. This is a design space that is not under our control. And what we need to do is avoid the two poles of like having one big rigid AI that never dies. Because I mean, even on a cultural level, people dying is very important. Like Max Planck said, like, how did you convince your peers that quantum mechanics was right? And said, like, I didn't. They just died first, right? So this is real, right? I mean, I see it happening in science today, all the time. So even if we human beings are going to be immortal, because we could be, right, we're going to need to find ways to guard against this kind of sclerosis, right? Whether it's the AI or the humans or some combination. But again, we can do the mechanism designed to prevent that from happening. We can have there's this very important thing in machine learning, which is model ensembles. For most applications, it's not deep learning that's the best method. It's things called boosting and bagging, where you don't use one model. This is almost a free lunch. It's like I learn 100 or 1,000 models and then combine their results, right? It's a crowd of models. Again, President 2.0 is really the same thing, but it's done at the level of a society. And then what's going to happen is, and again, in machine learning, we have algorithms for this, the models die, right? So I should never get to the point where I have one AI running America. I should always have, 1,000 AIs or 1,000,000 discussing how to run America, and periodically some of them just get booted. But I should never wind up with just one. That we need more entropy than that.
In your book, you one of the big themes is solving AI, right? So Arvin, I suppose, has this solution, his solved AI, or he claims to. What would it mean to solve AI?
So Solving AI is the holy grail of the field, and it has been since the 50s, right? And what do we mean by solving AI? In a way, it's not so. In computer science, there's, for example, the traveling salesman problem, right? How do you solve that problem? You find the shortest path that visits all the cities, right? You're a traveling salesman, right? And AI is just a much bigger problem, but you want to solve it. So it is the problem. The problem is to have a system that can do everything that an average human can equally well or better. Once we have that, we will have solved AI. So, for example, until we have a house bot, we haven't solved AI. So all these folks, at OpenAI and DeepMind and whatnot that say, AGI is, solving AI is imminent. Well, come on, where's the house spot, right? So there's, solving AI is really, it's really just, another term for like reaching AGI or reaching superintelligence. But I think it's actually in some ways a better one because it focuses on like, there's a problem here that we need to solve it, and is there a solution, right? And some people say like, oh no, intelligence is a million things and you'll never get there. The thing that gives the name to the master algorithm, the title is that no, the whole idea in machine learning is that there's one algorithm that can solve the problem. The algorithm has to be a learning algorithm. The same algorithm has to be able to learn to do all the different things that humans beings do. And we have there's mathematical reasons to believe in this, but we also have existence proofs like, like your brain, is an algorithm, at least if you're, a standard scientist, with a reductionist view of things. So we just don't know what the algorithm is. And evolution, famously, even in the 19th century, I forget who it was that said, I think maybe it was Boole, or said like, God did not create animals and plants. God created, in our terms, the algorithm by which plants and animals. So that is also, an algorithm that solves AI. It created us, right? So clearly, this is a solvable problem. Now, historically, people have been very optimistic. Every decade, people think they're on the verge of solving AI. In the 50s, the founding fathers said, like, yeah, we will have humans beat within a few years. And here we are.
Mm-hmm. But have humans really solved, do our brains really solve AI, right? Because we have extrapolation problems, right? We have these limited data sets, our lives, and there are things that we're never going to be able to imagine. We can't, through pure logic, deduce anything. We are still limited, right? So is it just that we're the benchmark that we're going to go by, or can we really say that we're these universal machines that, have solved AI?
Very good point. So first of all, human beings don't solve AI, they solve intelligence, like we're natural intelligence, right? But if you were able to reverse engineer the algorithm of our brains, which is what deep learning at some level tries to do, right? That would be a path to solving AI just by copying what the human brain does. This is why neural networks are built out of neurons, right? This is how ChatGPT works, right? So there's that sense of solving AI. Now, of course, the thing about human intelligence is that many people say, and I have partial sympathy with this, that there is no such thing as general intelligence. We human beings are much more flexible than, a chimpanzee, let alone a chicken, let alone a cockroach. But we just have the illusion that we're very general. Clearly, we're very, like we can do vision spectacularly well, like real-time video understanding. No machine can do that as well as do. On the other hand, just doing plain old arithmetic, computers can do that way better than us. So clearly, intelligence is a very multifaceted thing. And we have the illusion that we're a lot more general than we really are. So the way I like to think about this is that human beings are a point on the space of intelligences. One point. And cats are another point, but all of our animal intelligence is just a small region of intelligence space. With AI, we can explore the vastness, the full vastness of intelligence space. And this truly is a mind-boggling concept. We have no idea what we're going to find. Maybe there are laws that all intelligences have to obey. In a way, that's the goal of my research, is to discover and apply those laws. But it really is a much vaster space, and there's no reason to not explore it. I think we should do AI that's trying to copy the human brain or inspired by psychology. We should also do AI that is inspired by whatever you want. And again, traditionally, in symbolic AI, like John McCarthy, who founded that school, his belief was that you can solve AI just by doing logical reasoning. I've always had a hard time taking this seriously, but there are people, at least there were people. This used to be the dominant school of thought in AI. It's like it's all a pile of logic and nothing else. And in fairness, right, a computer is just a physical system that does logic. Even neural networks are being done on top of that logic. So these people are not idiots. Like at some level, you cannot deny that you can do everything with just logic, or else, there's some, magic happening, some ghost in the machine.
But that's not really how our brains work, right? If you look at, for example, good chess players, they have played lots of chess, right? They have a far larger data set. It's not like their brain is better at extrapolating away from the data set, or maybe it is because they've got enough experience, but they're better at interpolating because they've had far more games they've played, right?
Well, what you said is true, but it actually does not contradict what I just said. And you used a very interesting word there, which is extrapolation. I would actually say that the key difference between today's AIs and our brains is that our brains have learning algorithms that generalize much further than anything the learning algorithms can do. In fact, again, this is one of the main drivers of my research, is trying to generalize further. People look at how AlphaGo beat Lee Sedol, but in a way that's an unfair comparison, because AlphaGo beat Lee Sedol after playing millions and millions of games against itself, whereas Lee Sedol maybe played, I don't know, 10,000 games in his whole life, right? AlphaGo after 10,000 games would be completely wiped out by Lee Sedol. So clearly the ability to extrapolate is very important, right? As opposed to interpolate, which is to a large extent what neural networks do. That is the problem, is that we know how to extrapolate, right? Now, when we extrapolate, like if you look at this through the lens of symbolic AI, what you do is you induce new rules, new symbolic representations, new formulas in logic, right? And the more data you have, the more such formulas you can have. And again, Deep Blue was a symbolic AI system, and it was good enough to beat Kasparov at chess. It just had a lot of rules, heuristic rules, because again, this is AI. Nothing is infallible, and a lot of search, right? A lot of rules and a lot of search, and it had absorbed all these databases of chess games and whatnot. So symbolic AI, it was a logic engine, right? But it was beating Kasparov. Doing logic and recognizing patterns are different things, but they're not incompatible. The patterns that you recognize can be logical. And I would say part of how you recognize them is by doing logic, but you're also doing analogy and a lot of other things. So again, my argument in the master algorithm is that like each of these 5 tribes has a piece of the puzzle, but we really need to put all 5 together to solve AI.
But how do you come up with a really fair comparison there? Because you said, okay, the AI has had millions and millions and millions of games against itself, but then the human player has had conversations with other humans. They have this whole evolutionary history that may have many influences on the network in their brain. And then there's an added complication, which is that when the human's playing, they use far less energy than the computer does, right? So is it ever going to be possible really to test apples against apples, or is it just something that we're just different?
No, I mean, so very good question. And I just look at it from an engineering point of view. I'm designing a system to play Go or be my hotspot or whatever. And there is no single measure that I care about. There is a set of them. One of them is energy consumption. I want to minimize the energy consumption, other things being equal. Well, hell yeah, right? And in terms of energy consumption, human beings are way ahead of AI, right? You spend 20 watts to run your brain. Trying to do that with today's data centers would take more energy than a city. So we're winning on energy, very clear, right? But now you can go to every one of these aspects and say like, well, given the same amount of data, who learns farther, right? Like we do learning curves. Like we have a lot of methodology that came from psychology, right? One of them is learning curves, right? At 10, 100, 1,000 examples, how much have you learned? Now, what you've learned is also a function of the knowledge that you put in, right? Like the architecture of a neural network is putting in knowledge. They don't like to think of it that way, but the people who design these architectures, but I, who also designed them, I do like to think of it that way, right? You're putting in knowledge. Now, as you very well point out, the architecture of your brain is knowledge of the world that was put in by evolution. Again, Richard Dawkins he has a whole book in some sense making this point that came out recently, right? Is that your DNA, right, that encodes your brain is really encoding information about the world indirectly, but it's like if something works in this world, that tells me something about it and vice versa. So you're right. We had 500 millions of evolution putting knowledge into our brain, but now I can say, okay, your brain starts with this knowledge that was put in by evolution. My learning algorithm starts with this knowledge that I put in, and now let's see how they fare as I add data, right? So you can look at energy, you can look at the amount of data, you can look at, the output measures of like how accurate were you, how many games, did you win, what's your rank, and so like this is a multidimensional problem, but it's an eminently, there's nothing, unapproachable about this.
Hmm. And so
And again,
what's
like
the
this notion sorry, just to finish that thought, this notion that one magical day, human intelligence will be surpassed is mistaken, right? Human intelligence has already been surpassed by far. It's in the process of being surpassed in other ways. There may be others in which it will never will be, or it'll take hundreds of years. So once you think of AI as a multidimensional thing, this idea that there's an AGI point goes away.
Mhm. But if there was an AGI point, right? So that day where we can say that this is truly something that has reached human level of intelligence and all metrics, what's the quickest way there? What's the path? Do we already have the algorithms and now we just need to scale up, or do we need embodiment, or what does that shortest path look like?
No, very good. So, I mean, you can define an AGI day as the day at which, AI is better than us in every single dimension, right? This is a very strict test, but I think it's the real one. I would say that that day is probably not close, but the question, of course, is how do we get there faster? And precisely my argument in the master algorithm is that there's two paths to this. There's the slow, painful, never-ending one of trying to solve these problems one at a time. We'll never get there. And I think at this point, this is like the consensus view among almost everybody in AI and around. It's like you got to do it with learning, right? Another question, like, can you do it with one learning algorithm by some definition, or does it take a big plethora of learning algorithms and whatnot? But I think there's two. So I do think, finding one general learning universal learner, as we sometimes call it, is the only serious path to this. And then applying it to all these different things, whether it's doing the dishes or playing chess, right? So, and the learner itself is only 80% of the problem. 20%, like in any engineering, is going to be, 80% of the work, but, uh, to actually build the thing. And there's many design choices that have to be made. But the two key problems that I think we need to solve are we do need to unify these different machine learning paradigms, right? I think, this has been the main theme of my research and many other people for, since my PhD, actually. So for 30 years now, with some detours. But I think we're making very good progress towards that. I think we will get to that. In the foreseeable future, probably, meaning within the next few years. Once we've done that, is that all we need? Some people would say yes. Some people would then say like, oh, backprop is all we need, right? There are distinguished people in deep learning who think that's the case, right? My feeling is that even once we have that, we still will not be generalizing far enough. So we need to bring in some fundamentally new types of learning that we haven't before. Interestingly, the main types of learning that we have today have been there since the 50s. So I think part two is we need fundamentally new principles and algorithms for learning to generalize as far as humans doing. And that's also something that I'm working on.
I mean, as far as I understand, one aspect of the algorithms that we currently have is they're not sitting there thinking while waiting for you to input some command, right? You input a command and the command gets sent through some large network, and then it spits out an answer. Is one of the key aspects that's missing that we want something in some big loop that just runs constantly like perhaps our brains do?
Absolutely. So for some problems like curing cancer or playing chess, you don't need that. But to have, human level AI, you surely need that. And to have a working robot, you surely need that. And here's the thing. There are many systems in the world today that already do that. Like a self-driving car is doing that, right? A self-driving car has a loop, right? And I mean, even in basic computer science, like a computer, right? There's this thing called a finite state machine. It's a Turing machine, right? A Turing machine is always taking input and always, at least if you use it that way. And even an airplane, the autopilot of an airplane is such a system, right? It's continuously, reading in the data from the sensors and deciding what to do with every flap and so on, right? So this kind of I would say that every the governor of a steam engine, right, is a feedback system that decides how much, that it's basically a continuous control, right? So there's a whole field of control systems, cybernetics, as it was, called once, and in the Soviet Union, which diverged from computer science and AI, but really you need those two things. So my answer to your question would be like, we need that. We have that not so much in AI. There is an area of AI that's like, sometimes called lifelong learning or online learning, right? So like which is, and I've worked in some of this as well, like the model is like the data is continuously coming in, you are continuously learning from it, and you're continuously making decisions. There are algorithms that do stuff like this today in a number of areas, like say playing the stock market, right? You're always learning and you're always playing and you're always learning from what happened to the stocks you bought and sold.
If we jump back onto the topic of regulation, right? So this is something we touched a little bit on, but then jump right off. What does sensible regulation look like? Right, so if you were in charge, not the AI, but you were in charge, what sort of regulations would you put in place to optimally develop AI moving forwards?
Great question. And I have a one-word answer to it, and that's none. AI should not be regulated, period. Unless that you think that this is a very radical statement, let me just put it this way. We don't regulate mathematics. We don't say, oh, somebody could use calculus to make a missile that they will throw at New York. Therefore, we need to regulate calculus to make sure the bad guys don't use it. We don't say we need to regulate, JavaScript because the bad guys will use JavaScript to steal your credit card information, right? This is ridiculous. We also don't say we should regulate quantum mechanics because it will get used to make nuclear bombs. We regulate nuclear bombs, right? And it's the same thing with AI. AI is a basic technology. Regulating it just makes no sense. Specific products of AI, specific applications need to be regulated as such. Should self-driving cars be regulated? Well, of course. They should be regulated as cars. That's what they are. Should, drug discovery by AI be regulated? Well, of course, it should be regulated as drug discovery. But trying to regulate AI qua AI is just, it's a bad idea. It's just, all it's going to do is hinder progress, create needless bureaucracies and obstacles for the AI researchers, startups, companies, etc. It's going to accomplish nothing good. It's just based on a fundamental confusion about what AI is. Now, when I talk to people like, members of parliament, congressional staffers, senators and whatnot, I say like, we actually do need federal legislation on AI today and urgently, right? They ask me, so like, what should we pass, right? And I say like, we need to do with AI what Congress did with the internet in 1997, which is we need federal law that preempts state level legislation. Because right now what we have is a patchwork of state level legislation, that keeps getting worse, right? All these bad ideas keep putting into law, and there's a patchwork. So we need a seemingly enlightened approach, protecting the AI developers from all this, unfounded liability. As a counterexample to this, we have the AI Act in Europe, which honestly is the stupidest piece of law I've ever seen. Really. The GDPR was bad, the DMA, DSA were bad, but the AI Act really is something uniquely bad. I mean, we could go into that, but it's like, yeah, it's a shining example of what not to do. I've actually said this to, for example, Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House. Talking with him about this is like, the AI Act, to a first approximation, if everything that it says you do the opposite, you're on the right track. Of course, this is not my literal advice, but yeah, if you had to choose between doing the AI Act and all the opposite, the latter would be better.
Can you give some specific examples there? What is so terrible about the Act?
Yeah, absolutely. So, let me try to be succinct. So, first of all, it starts from this foundational error that it's trying to regulate AI qua AI, right? That is already an error, right? The next error that it falls into, which again, I mean, we warned them about this, is like it has to define AI. It defines AI so vaguely that everything is AI. Your laptop is AI. My pocket calculator is AI. If I'm a regulator in charge of interpreting that, and I like to regulate everything, I can decide that your laptop is AI. Right? This is just, we know how regulation gets abused, how regulatory agencies kind of like grow cancerously and like the vaguer the definition, the more. But having said that, the definition of AI that they had originally was like, we said like this other thing is like, it's too soon to regulate AI because AI is very young, right? Just wait to see what the heck comes out of this. Like, this is like, what the AI Act does is like, it says like, let us jail this baby because he might grow up into a criminal. It's like, hello, this is just a baby. Why are you making laws about things that don't exist yet? But Their definition of AI, the AI Act was about to come out and ChatGPT came out. They had to scramble to revise the definition to include LLMs. So of course this is going to happen. And tomorrow it's going to be outdated again, right? Like when LLMs are no longer the state of the art. So this is the second or third problem. But then, to get into the meat of things, the AI Act, and honestly, the stupidest part of all is what I'm about to say. It divides AI applications into tiers of risk. The highest level risk applications of AI, it just outlaws. And those applications include things like face recognition, emotion recognition, predictive policing, right? You cannot have emotional intelligence without emotion recognition. Amen. Like, this, like when you talk to a person, it's very important to understand what their emotional state is. The European Union has made it illegal for AI to understand your emotions. This is beyond stupid. It's unbelievable. And predictive policing, it makes you know what predictive policing is, right? It's like
You
predictive
predict where
policing
the crime is
proper.
going to be. You send your
Yeah,
police car. Yeah.
exactly. Predictive policing properly then is a huge boon. It lets the police force of 100 do the job of 10,000. It protects the neighborhoods where there's most crime. It protects the minorities that people claim are hurt by it, right? But like, you can debate the merits, but come on, don't just make it illegal. And then, to cut a long story short, for the next years, it basically has all these, regulatory constraints, reporting requirements, testing requirements. But just to give you an example, it mandates a battery of tests on AIs that nobody knows how to perform. Even the Googles and the emeritus today, they do not know how to test their AIs, but by law in the European Union as of August, they are having to do that. This just boggles my mind.
I mean, famously, there have been AI experts themselves that have asked for regulations to be put in place. There's this famous letter for a 6-month moratorium. If you had to steelman the other side of the argument, and specifically when thinking of experts and their opinion of why you should place regulation restrictions, what would that look like? Your steel man of the position.
No, so there, I mean, I think I understand. So the people who propose AI regulation come from different places. They're not all the same, right? But let me just focus on the ones that are AI experts, right? There's a number of famous AI research. I mean, this is a big debate going on within the AI community right now, right? With prominent people on both sides, right? So each side, it behooves us to take the other side seriously, right? And at least understand where they're coming from. And I do think I understand where they're coming from. They're coming from this bad analogy between AI and humans, right? They can't help. And again, it's interesting that this runs so deep that even AI experts cannot avoid this. And I mean, I've known many of these people for like decades, literally. Because the only intelligence that we know is human intelligence or animal intelligence, we can't, as soon as we see something behaving intelligently, we immediately project onto it all of these human qualities that it just doesn't have. Consciousness, sentience, emotions, the will to power, intentions, etc., etc. None of that is there. What is there is an algorithm solving an NP-complete problem, right? Or some combination of them. But as soon as you fall for this, and like paradoxically, this, the people who got into AI were the ones who were most seduced by this vision. I was too. I was very interested in psychology as much as in AI when I got into AI. So like this parallel between AI and intelligence, like we find it fascinating. And to a lot of people, this is what motivated them, is we want artificial humans. And so they can't tell the difference between what we have and are going to have and this vision of AI that is human-like. If you dispel that confusion between AIs and humans, which again is the number one goal of 2040, is like, do not confuse AI with Terminator. AI is more like Prezibot. It's us humans controlling it and repairing it and building it and doing all of this. I think most of these fears, most of these unfathomable, because like the fears are always very vague, right? But they're based on this mistaking AIs for humans. And then they're also based on honestly, I think people don't think ahead enough. And, unfortunately, we in the field are not necessarily that much better at, like they don't make this distinction which we made earlier between intelligence and control. They go like, oh, if the thing is very intelligent, then it's a danger, right? Having an AI that's more intelligent than me is inherently dangerous. And again, we've already gone over why that's a mistake. But I think this is what drives their fears.
I think if I was personally going to steel man the argument and put it into the language that you use, so you say that we shouldn't think of AI as being the nuclear bomb, but rather the atomic physics or the underlying the technical infrastructure that you would use to build the bomb, and you regulate the bomb, not the infrastructure. But imagine if we had had a situation where we had discovered how to build nuclear weapons, and it was just very easy for people to build them. You open up that box, and now Joe in his backyard can build a thermonuclear weapon and set it off when he's angry. It could be the case that AI is ultimately more like this situation than the situation that we're actually in currently with nuclear weapons, right? And maybe this is where the fear is really positioned.
No, very good. So I'm glad you brought this point. I think this is a third element, but it's also a real one. And so let me simplify things like there is the danger that AI will go bad, go rogue. This is the Terminator scenario, right? This is one danger, which I think is fatuous, honestly. But then there's also the danger of AI, bad people or irresponsible people will make bad use of AI, right? And this is a real danger. I do not disagree with that danger, right? So I think bad people will try to make bad use of AI, just like they do with every technology. Criminals, totalitarians, for sure, right? But now there's two things, right? Like, I think they have both a bad understanding of the problem and a very, very bad solution, right? And let's go through each of these in turn, right? So what's going to happen is the scenario that these people have is completely unrealistic. It's a thought experiment that's like, Joe in his backyard is angry, and now he makes a nuclear bomb. Well, first of all, in order to make anything with AI, you need other things besides AI. So again, AI is only playing the role of helping you do something, right? Let's say your goal is to make a weapon of mass destruction. You need regulations and laws to prevent that, regardless of whether it's being done with AI. And in particular, we already have them. SB 1047 is stupid because we already have what we need in order to prevent people, or the best that we can think of, to prevent people from making nuclear bombs. Having laws specifically about the use of AI for that makes no sense, right? So this is one aspect, right? There's another aspect, which is that bad guy with the nuclear bomb in his backyard is not the only one. Like there's this famous experiment, like from Nick Bostrom, like the paperclip factory, right? You know about this, right? The paperclip factory takes over the world and destroys everything because its objective function is to make as many paperclips as possible, right? This is really a nice thought experiment to illustrate what's wrong with this frame of thinking. It's like the world does not consist of a paperclip factory. It consists of millions of factories producing millions of things and millions of organizations, regulatory, policing, blah, 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 all of us, all of them using AI. So whatever intelligence the paperclip factory has, even if everything else went wrong, all the guardrails, all the programming, even if that paperclip factory suddenly went off the rails, there's a million more times or a billion more times intelligence on the side of containing that paperclip factory or bad temperature in his backyard, right? So, and which gets me to what is really, I think, the biggest point is that this solution to these dangers of AI, which are real, is not to tamp down on AI, is to have more intelligence, right? Bank robbers use cars to get away, after a bank robbery. That is not a reason to say cars can't go faster than horses. It's a reason to give faster cars to the police. And, Neuromancer famously had the Turing police, right? It's AI whose job is to police AI. And that is exactly what we need. And in general, I would say there's actually a very important, very all-encompassing point is like all of these people worried about AI, from the doomers to the people worried about disinformation and the jobs apocalypse and all that, they all want to limit the intelligence because more intelligent AI is more dangerous. This is exactly the opposite. And all of these measures are making the world more dangerous. What is dangerous is stupid AI, not is enough AI. If we want to make the world safer, we need to make the AI more intelligent, right? And we want the intelligence to be in good hands, which gets to this debate, which again is very centered today, of open AI versus closed AI. We know from software that open source is better because it's a million people playing with it versus just the guys at Microsoft. And there's this cartoon of the AI doomer saying like AI is so dangerous, only I can control it. There's like this one guy sitting in this and like all of us should be suspicious of that. So we want more intelligence and we want open AI. I mean, let me just put it this way. People are worried that AI will get too smart and take over the world. The problem is that AI is too stupid and it's already taken over the world.
I suppose another aspect of the discussion is that we actually already don't, there's no individual who really controls the world, right? If you look in politics, they're all squabbling amongst one another to gain power, right? To get political capital in order to enact whatever reform it is that they personally want to reform. I suppose another worry might be that this system, which we already don't have control, is just going to become more complex and more difficult to control. And we're just going to find ourselves in a world that looks very non-human.
Well, so exactly. So the issue of control is the critical one. And again, this is part of what worries people, the pessimists, if you will, the doomers, is we don't understand AI anymore and it's completely out of our control and things are going to go bad. And again, this fear is not unfounded, but notice the following few interesting things. First of all, we have always lived in a world that we almost entirely do not control. This is where we evolved. It's not like we don't know how to deal with the world that is too complex for our understanding. We've always lived in it and prospered in it, and that's the miracle. Now, there was a period in technology that lasted a few hundred years where we could completely control and understand the technology. If you look at a car, circa 1950, right? A good auto mechanic understands how every part of that works, okay? But, hello, we are already not in that world. Nobody understands. There's no one person in the world that understands all parts of how my car works, right? My car has 3,000 computers in it, right? That train has left the station, right? And now, of course, can machine learning make this even worse? Yes. Machine learning in a way is a double-edged sword, right? Because who knows as it evolves what it's going to evolve to. And in fact, the whole idea of the singularity is precisely this, is that the algorithms just run away, like they make ever more complex ones and keep evolving, and we just have no understanding of what goes on anymore. Well, I like to say to people, only half jokingly, that if that's the singularity, it already happened in the 50s. Because in the 50s, the nearest neighbor algorithm was invented. It was the first algorithm that was able to learn anything. It was the first master algorithm, if you will, right? Previous algorithms, they were like, you learn a linear frontier. I give you infinite data. All it does is learn that linear frontier. Nearest neighbor can learn an arbitrary function if you give it enough data, right? So in some sense, the singularity happened then. In a larger sense, the singularity happened 2 million years ago in the African savannah when we were born. We are the wild card, right? A monkey, a chicken, those are somewhat predictable, right? They have intelligence, but within bounds. Human beings are this strange thing where, who knows what direction we're going to go in next. So in many ways, we're very well equipped to go into a more unpredictable world. Now, that is not a reason to be complacent, right? In fact, the world as it is today, the internet, as we've seen, is full of fragilities, things that go wrong. Our job is to continuously be making it more robust and making sure that we stay in control. And again, fortunately, with AI, unlike with classic computer systems, we actually know very well how to do that because, again, AIs are controlled by their reward function. The rest is engineering. It needs to obey good engineering guidelines and whatnot and minimize power consumption and so on. But we just have to be very clearly in control of the objective function, the reward function of these AIs. We can still screw up by having the wrong reward function or evil ones and whatnot, but that is the human side of the problem. The idea that just because we have AIs that are very powerful, they're going to be completely impossible to control, I think is mistaken also. And again, this motivates a lot of my research. I really do think, and there are strong theoretical reasons to believe that people say oh, we will be to that AI like ants are to us. Actually, not necessarily. There's a ceiling to what intelligence can be, right? Once I have a high-level programming language, I can write anything in it. So at some level, I think there are some laws that intelligence will continue to obey, no matter how smart the AI gets. And by understanding those laws, we will have a handle on the AI, and the world will actually not be as in control as it might seem.
Do you think, so in your book again, one of the main characters is Wokism. Do you think this is really an outgrowth of our current technology, right? Wokism is sort of a symptom. We have this technology that's crazy making, let's say. And, surely you can imagine situations in which the new technology we're creating is equally or even more so crazy making. And then we're pushing ourselves into a hyper woke state, let's say. I'm trying to point towards your dystopia. We might be creating this for ourselves.
So Wokism is not an outgrowth of current technology. It is actually the latest manifestation of something very old. Wokism is just Marxism in the new guise. And that new guise includes a number of differences that have, different roots. Certainly, the growth of social media has played an important part in Wokism's, rise to power, if you will. But Wokism, there's a continuum of ideas. Maybe someone should come up with a general name for this, but which include things like Wokism and Marxism. Those are really side effects of capitalism. So in some way, it is technology, but it's technology that goes back to industrial revolution, right? And there is let me just sort of try to have one concrete synthesis of this. There's this notion of in game theory, which is the mathematical foundation of social science as well as evolution, of zero-sum and non-zero-sum games, right? And progress is non-zero sum games. Is you and I trade, we both benefit, right? And the entrepreneur, like the invisible hand, all of that is the non-zero sum game at work. A zero sum game is a game where what I win, you lose, and there's no other way around it. The sum of our rewards is zero, right? And the problem is that there are people in society, there have always been, this goes back to our genetics, who all they do is play the zero sum game. Because there's a very important fact that very few people know, and even I didn't until a few years ago, that inside every non-zero sum game is a zero sum one. So the whole history of humanity really is that we are playing this vast non-zero sum game, but then once our group, our coalition, our company, whatever, once we've won that game, there is, and gotten the rewards, there is the question of how do we apportion them? And that is intrinsically a zero sum game. And the whole communism, socialism, Wokism, equity, blah, 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 blah. This is all just people who are purely playing the zero sum game because it pays off, right? Going back to the tribes that we evolved in, some people can do very well just by playing the zero sum game. Now, the problem is that if all that you do is play the zero sum game, we are hosed, right? We are going down, right? In particular, I don't think democracy can survive without growth. So, Wokism actually has a very interesting genealogy, but I would say more like it's this whole set of ideas that is in some sense a disease of capitalism. It's a parasitical outgrowth of capitalism. Unfortunately, the more advanced the capitalism gets, the more affluent the society is, and America is a very affluent society, and some of the other countries that have been infected, like Canada, Britain, Australia, etc., right, there's a lot of room for this kind of crap before the reality check sets in, right? The problem with the Cultural Revolution in China was that people started starving. That didn't go well, right? And you go back to the French Revolution or the Soviet Union or Cambodia, things go bad very quickly. When you're in an affluent society, you can afford a very large amount of nonsense before, reality bites. Part of what I'm doing in the book is showing people, look, if we stay on this woke road, this is where we wind up, and it doesn't look pretty, right? And in fact, I think a good satire makes, and I looked at some of the great satires, like satire like Swift and Orwell and whatnot. A good satire makes fun of everybody equally. And in most of the book, I'm making fun of the Republican candidate and campaign, which is Prezibot, but I want to make equal fun of the other side and making it happen in the Democrats, et cetera, et cetera. And making it happen in the woke world is just almost, it's almost an inevitable idea, right? Because you want to see what goes wrong if that happens, right? You also want to see how the technology plays out and then how the two interact. And there's this thing which, again, is one of the jokes in the book that's also meant to make you think is, the wokes like to present themselves as oh, we're the young people. You guys are the dinosaurs, right? Your objections are all outdated, which if you know any history will immediately bring a smile to your face, right? For various reasons. But part of what the book is going to say, look, there's this world where we fast forward 16 years, and now the wokes are the old guard. They are the dinosaurs. The new generation is chafing, at the bit to overturn that, corrupt old order. And we see all the different, funny ways in which it is corrupt. So, it's trying to send that message as well to well, if you think you're the rebels and the others are the dinosaurs, well, play this out a little bit and, imagine when you're the dinosaurs.
Do you think inherently wokeism is progressive or is it self-interested? I mean, you pointed out this sort of tribal element where you want to play this zero-sum game where there's the wealth of society and you want to get as much of it as possible for your in-group. So do you really believe that? I don't want to put words in your mouth. So do you believe that woke culture is really an outgrowth of self-interest, and these people that claim to be progressive are really just speaking for themselves, maybe in a convoluted way?
No, a very good point. I mean, there's definitely an element of self-interest in. So let me get that out of the way. There are people in woke world, and I know some or many, unfortunately, who are just grifters. I mean, like the Robin DeAngelos of this world, right? Getting paid $50,000 a pop for a workshop on how to de-whiteify your organization. Those people are grifters. We know that genre, right? But those are actually not the most important ones, right? There are also a lot of useful idiots, right? This is a phrase famously coined by Lenin. The useful idiots are the people who don't understand they're being manipulated, right? Lenin thought the useful idiots were very important. A lot of my colleagues, at my university, to be very blunt, sadly, are useful idiots. A very large number of people are useful idiots, right? But then, right, there are the people, and this in fact are the most noxious and dangerous, and if the word evil applies to anything, it applies to them. They are actually the people who are not, they may be partly doing it for their self-interest because it benefits their group. Say you're a black woman, and the concept of intersectionality was invented by a black academic in America, basically to point out that by being a black woman, I'm more oppressed than black men are than white women are. So you can't not see an element of self-interest there. But this is self-interest that is combined with an altruistic motive. And in fact, you see a lot of white men, who are very woke, who are completely going against their interests. So this is clearly not just self-interest. So these are the true believers. These are the people who really do, and those are the most dangerous. The most dangerous people in this world are not the Saddam Husseins, they're the Osama bin Ladens. The Saddam Husseins who are purely self-interest, at the end of the day, they're rational players. You say, look, if you get out of line, I nuke you. Or, not nuke you, but something, right? And then they get in line, right? If you send the wrong signal, which is what happened in Iraq and is happening now in Ukraine, then they take advantage of it. But the Osama bin Ladens, those people are dangerous because they will blow themselves up for their cause. And again, they're not being self-interested when they blow themselves up. They're just being evil.
So we have to move towards the end of the conversation. And you mentioned the job apocalypse, or I don't know what you call it in the business, but this idea that AI is going to take over all the jobs and we're all going to become poor and have no authority in society because we have no purpose. So you don't think this is going to happen? You, as far as I understand, you think this is not a worry. Why is that?
Indeed. So the jobs apocalypse is not going to happen. And again, it's just like AI is such a target-rich environment. Whatever your fears are, you can project them onto AI. It's beautiful, right? It's like we're in this field that just bring it on, right? It's like a Rorschach test. The jobs apocalypse is another great one. People have every right and reason to worry about their jobs, right? Like I should worry about mine as an academic and so on. So this is not unreasonable. Again, these fears all start from a very reasonable place. Okay, but now let's look first at history, right? History, decade after decade, people were paranoid about how automation was going to do people out of their jobs, and then it always wound up creating more jobs. I mean, think about it. 200 years ago, everybody was a farmer. And then agriculture was automated, and today 2% of us in developed countries are farmers. What happened to the other 98%? Are we all unemployed? No, we're just doing jobs that couldn't even be imagined back then. I mean, almost every job description in existence today of the 50,000 or whatever it is in the BLS's database, that didn't exist then, right? So, and to take another example, when ATMs came out, people were like, oh, this is going to be the end of jobs for bank tellers. There are more bank tellers in the world now than there were then. They just don't waste their time giving you cash anymore. They do other more useful and more interesting things. Even more recent example, very relevant now to the likes of, LLMs and ChatGPT. When Google Translate came out, it was a spectacular step forward. This was pre-deep learning. This was in around 2010. People were like, this is the end of the jobs for translators. There are more translators in the world now than there were then. Why? Because a lot of things that were too expensive to translate now can be translated. So what we have is an order of magnitude more documents and books and what being translated than before. And then what happens, like if you ask a random human translator what they do is they first run it through the translation software and then they refine it because the human is still needed. And if you look at all the main uses of ChatGPT and the like today, it's the same thing. you still need a human on top of it. So the end result is to create more jobs. Now, some people say, right, this time it's different, right? It's always the argument. Ah, yes, I know all that history, but AI is different because, again, to do a straw man of the argument, the Industrial Revolution automated, muscle, physical work. AI automates intellectual work, and now there's nothing left for humans to do, right? No, honestly, this is the argument. But here's the thing: we've already been talking about like how intelligence has many different facets. Some of them, the AI, we need to look at the AI front as it progresses, right? Computers already do many things way better than us, and we're not all unemployed because of that. And we have web developers by the million, and app developers, and et cetera, software engineers, like et cetera, right? So what happens is the AI makes some aspects of intelligence way cheaper, right? And economics 101 tells you that when something is cheaper, the demand goes up. So the demand for intelligence goes up, but then the demand for the complements also goes up. If the price of butter goes down, the demand for bread goes up because now I can have more bread and butter with the same money that I had before. And the great complement to AI and all of these things is human intelligence. So the value of human intelligence is going to go up. What you have to do in your job is it's to figure out of the tasks that you do, which ones can better be done by your AI. And then you with your AI will do less of the boring stuff, will do your job better. It's not man versus machine. It's man with machine versus man without. It's like, I forget where I saw this saying, AI will not replace you. Someone using AI will replace you. Mm-hmm. Well, you should start using AI and be the one doing the replacing. So, and then on top of all of this, there is the following, right? Even after all of this plays out, the cost of intelligence goes down. People have more money, right? And they spend the money on other things. Like, for example, a bigger house creating jobs for construction workers, eating out more, creating jobs for cooks and waiters and whatnot. So even in all those job categories that people say like, oh, but we can't retrain those people to be programmers, you don't have to. There's going to be more jobs for them as well.
I think another aspect of the argument, though, is you have people talking about the rise of bullshit jobs, right? I forget there's this famous author. So there's this idea that more and more of the jobs we're doing are not really useful. We're sort of just turning a crank. And then there's the other aspect that we're spending more time in education, right? So more and more people are going through their undergraduate degrees. Now they're getting masters. Now they're getting PhDs. And this soaks up man hours, right? And so one side of the argument might be that we're already seeing human hours being soaked up in useless work, let's say. And that this will become we're already seeing this with our current algorithms and our current infrastructure that's in place, and this will get worse and worse as time goes on. Do you not see any weight in those sorts of arguments?
I do think that bullshit jobs are a problem. Now, when you say bullshit jobs, you can be referred to more than one thing, right? I would say that, for example, being a factory worker is not a bullshit job, right? It's a boring job, but you're accomplishing something useful, right? I think, so if AI freezes from that drudgery, like automation is already doing, that's actually a good thing if then there are jobs elsewhere. I do think there is a real problem with bullshit jobs in the sense that there are a lot of jobs in the world today that really do not accomplish anything useful. They're parasitical, right? But this, again, is another one of those diseases of capitalism. We've been so successful that there's actually room for all these parasites. Another thing is that, I have perfectly, let's say I'm talking to someone who does a bullshit job. They need to earn a living, right? This is the job they were able to find, right? I actually don't have anything against that, right? You got to earn a living. I'd rather earn a living doing something that I feel has a high positive impact by far. But if all I can have is a bullshit job, then I'd rather do that than starve, right? It has to be the system that does not reward bullshit jobs, which in the end comes down to us. The reason there are so many bullshit jobs is that I'm able to sell my bullshit service to you. So if you're better educated, better informed, more enlightened, et cetera, then you will just not have the demand for that bullshit job. And if you do, then maybe I think it's a bullshit job, but it really isn't, right? So what exactly is a bullshit job is also things that would have been bullshit jobs at some point, maybe there's enough affluence to actually have a justification for those jobs, like, pet groomers, right? Or like pet, pampering, right? That whole thing, causes a certain amount of revulsion in me, but I see the logic behind it. So It's we can tamp down on the amount of bullshit jobs to the extent that they are bullshit, but largely I think this comes from us being better educated, which gets to your other point, which is yes, we are spending more time than ever in education, and that time I think is going to go up. I don't think that time is wasted. I mean, I think personally love nothing more than learning new things. But I think what's going to happen, in fact, is already happening, but like you can already see all these things happening, is that this whole model that you get a college degree and then you've learned, whatever, to be an engineer or the doctor or something else, and you're set for life. This is dying or is already dead, right? What's going to have to happen is that like you are learning throughout your life to do new things and to do your old things with AI, with new technologies, right? You can't not, if you're going to college right now, you can't learn in 4 years everything you're going to need for life, right? Maybe what you should, maybe in some cases you still want to spend those 4 years, maybe less, but either way, what I think is like people are going to spend, a large chunk of their entire life learning. But it's good because that learning will make them a lot more productive because they're learning to use technology for these, different purposes and new technology. As the AI develops, right? As we are seeing now, for example, with prompt engineering and whatnot, people will be learning how to use this to do things. And I actually think, there's nothing wrong with that. Yes, the time is spent learning, but overall, right? If you look at the cost of the learning and the benefit outweighs the cost. So it's a good thing.
So moving towards the end of the conversation then, can you paint a picture for me of what a beautiful future could look like? Right? So not your dystopia, right? If your book is successful and it helps us steer through the danger and towards a brighter future, what does that actually look like?
It looks like, what Prezibot 3.0 illustrates. So, as much as the book is dystopian, it ends on a hopeful note, like no spoilers, but it's not like at the end of the day, this is not a pessimistic book, right? So the vision of I think there's a very simple term for what I'm picturing. It's collective intelligence, right? The great vocation of AI is not to replace us or even to just be my co-pilot. It's to increase our collective intelligence, our intelligence as a group. And what we're talking about, with AI augmented democracy is just one aspect of this. It's this in politics. What we're going to have if we use AI properly is every organization, every group, every school, every hospital is going to work better. How does it work better? It's that, think about it this way. Every organization, every society today, the intelligence of the whole is less than the sum of the intelligences of the parts. And that's the tragedy. Human beings are very intelligent. Even the dumbest person in the world is very intelligent compared to, any other creature. And the thing that makes humans powerful is collective intelligence, is that a tribe of 150 human beings is an absolutely amazing world-conquering thing, as we know. But our intelligence, the brain size that we have, etc., works with 150 people. With 300 million, it's a miracle that it works at all, right? It's a miracle. But really, even a company of 100,000 people, the intelligence of the company, I've run into this over and over again. Somebody asks me, well, do you have a solution to problem, X? And I go like, that person down the hall has the solution in your company, but they don't know. Or like when an employee retires, they lose their memory. Or the decision processes are so broken that they make something that is obviously the wrong decision because the right people who knew the right things were never consulted or the things weren't brought in. AI can solve this problem. Again, the internet creates the physical infrastructure for this to happen, but the part that's missing is the AI. So the future is a society that works better because our collective intelligence. So right now, the intelligence is less than the sum of the parts. If it was equal to the sum of parts, it would already be good, but that's not the game, right? The whole goal is the emergent part, is when the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And in fact, I did some work on this some years ago where when you do this properly, the intelligence of the whole is not just greater than the sum of the parts, it's exponentially greater than the sum of the parts. The intelligence of your brain is not just greater than the sum of the intelligence of your neurons, each of which is a stupid thing. It's exponentially greater, right? So what AI is going to do is combine us into a greater intelligence in the same way that your brain combines your neurons into a greater intelligence, and think, try to picture just, how much better this will be.
There's one thing that I had a recent interview with Thomas Metzinger, and he's an expert on consciousness, and he describes this model of the self, where as a baby, to start with, you're trying to develop models for the world around you, and so you develop models for your mother and your father and the people you're interacting with, and eventually you realize that these people have internal states that you have no knowledge of. And so you build up this model of selves, like to describe these agents in your surroundings, and eventually you map this idea of selfiness onto yourself, right? And so the idea is that your first person perspective, this idea of me, I, is sort of imported from your understanding of the other agents in the world. And so one of the things I wonder is whether necessarily when we build AIs, for them to understand us, whether there'll be this sort of importation of this idea of the self onto the AI, very much like what it's hypothesized happens with humans, at least from a few Thomas Metzinger and his co-authors.
I think for some types of AI that will be very useful and widespread, this will not be relevant, but for some it will. And in fact, this has been a popular field in AI, from the beginning. It comes and goes, like this whole idea of like metacognition and like, theory of mind, for example, right? Like, this comes again from psychology, is we are at the point where we have a theory, the AIs are going to need to have a theory of mind of the humans. And then you ask, will they project it onto themselves? And my guess is that if they're good AIs, in some ways they will, but again, they will understand the difference between their mind and ours. So like, in a way, it's like human beings, and again, it's very amazing and beautiful, even the way these things happen in child development, right? How they acquire these things one after another. But it is a crucial point when I realize like you and I are both, persons, and then, I can generalize from you to me, and I can generalize from me to you. Unfortunately, we generalize too far. We tend to assume that other people are more like us than they really are, and often don't understand them because of that, right? So think of the people who study, for example, animal psychology. I'm studying chimpanzees. I understand that they have a mind, that I have a mind, but it's also very salient in my mind that their mind works differently from mine. So some things I will not generalize from a chimpanzee to me, but I will generalize from you to me. And AI will be like this. We're going to have a future in which humans have mental models of the AIs. They're starting to develop this. This is the beautiful thing about ChatGPT. People now have models of how that AI works, which is something they didn't have before. And for example, of how to manipulate them, right? Right now, it's the humans manipulating the bots, not the other way around. But, and this is, of course, has a long way to go. The machines also need to have a model of our minds. And in some very confused, way, because of the way language was, maybe they have some things that correlate with it or not, but really, explicitly, at least, they don't have that model. They need to have that model. So we're going to have humans and AIs. I have a model of my AI. It's like, again, it goes back to the centaur. Gary Kasparov told me this thing that, stuck in my mind forever, which is like, a centaur isn't really good until you've spent several months learning what that computer chess playing program does, what it's good at and what it isn't, right? It's not just like, oh, you glue the two together. No, there's a learning process by which you acquire a model of their mind. And with machine learning, the computer can and should be also acquiring a model of your mind, which is exactly what we do between humans, right? You and I work well together. Once we have, learned enough about each other, it's going to be the same thing with AI.
The thing that the world that I picture, right, is one where if it's indeed, I don't think there's anything special about the meat between our ears, right? Mm-hmm. I don't think there's any reason why carbon is going to be better than silicon at producing a consciousness. And so if there's nothing really stopping an AGI from being formed, and people can do it, it's just an engineering problem, then people are going to want to do it. There's going to be, even if someone does come and place regulation from above, someone will one day do this. And equally, as you said, we currently call our AI Siri and and Alexa, right? And there will be people who will decide that these things are sentient, whether they are or not, and will give them rights. I can imagine that happening. And what you're doing when you're giving rights to people is you're offloading power onto them, right? That's really what we're doing. We're giving the power of the state to individuals, right? I can call the police if someone's robbing my house and so on. And so you're arming me with the weapons of the state. And so when we give AI, whether it's sentient or not, it has whatever powers it has, when we give them rights, then we're offloading a whole bunch of power onto AIs. And so in your book, for instance, the main characters, they realize all of a sudden, hey, look, we can run an AI for president. It's like one of the central themes. This is the path, the path through which you get an AI in power in your book. I don't think this is the way that things are going to happen. I think what will happen more realistically is we'll have a change of the form of government, not that we'll have a robot president. But so this is the picture that I have, that slowly, bit by bit, we will give AI more and more power through rights, through access to data, through whatever circuitous route that it takes. And then eventually we'll wake up one day and realize that the internet is ubiquitous, that it's everywhere, right? So there was no day that the internet, that I needed the internet in every aspect of my life. I think power comes from, power comes from other people needing me. And I need AI more than it needs me. Like, I think you talk in your discussions about the fact that, what's my value to Google and what's Google's value to me? I have a feeling that as time goes on, AI is going to be worth more and more and more and more to the individual. And with that comes power, right? And I suppose that the thing that people worry about when it comes to UBI is that the job apocalypse and instantiating UBI to help people out is that people on UBI have no power, right? So who's going to enforce UBI when people have lost control of power? And anyway, so this is the picture that I have of a route that AI could take to becoming quite dangerous, and that is that it's step by step. And we don't really see it coming, and there's no day of AGI. It's just 1,000 years from now. It's the sea we swim in.
I agree with you that people will assign sentience to some of these AIs, and will try to give them rights. There's already people advocating for that. So I agree with you that could happen. But two things. First is we must stop it from happening. Technologies can go in good directions and bad directions. That would be a very bad self-defeating direction. It's a temptation that we need to avoid at all costs. I agree, it's a real one. But AI should never have rights. AI should never have power, right? Every AI belongs to someone and is working on their behalf, whether it's a person, a corporation, or a government. AIs are us, right? I think you're right that there's ways in which this could go astray, but we must make sure that it doesn't, because, in many ways, of which you mentioned some, this will end up being bad. Now, if it still does come to pass, because it could, because people are fooled, right? Then, you could wind up in a world that there's a difference between rights and power, right? Someone on UBI, they will still have rights, right? They will still have a lot of power that comes from their pocketbook, right? Mm-hmm. In a capitalist society, you have almost more power that comes from spending money than from voting. In fact, as a control signal, spending money is much more fine-grained and bigger than voting, right? So just because this happened, it would not be the ideal society, I don't think, but I can imagine a world in which AIs have rights and whatnot, but people are still way better off than they are today. And at the end of the day, when push comes to if things starts to go bad, human beings will start to squeal pretty quickly, right? So if the AI starts to oppress on me, boy, you're gonna hear from me.
Yeah, I suppose the image I have, if I was going to encapsulate it in one small image, is that it's a ratchet, right? That we have this ratcheting system when it comes to AI. And the scary thing is that it's multidimensional and can ratchet up in different directions. And, there's no going back, right? I suppose this is why people were interested in this moratorium idea, this open letter, is that they imagine that we're ratcheting into a situation that's out of our control, and they want to be a little bit cautious.
I mean, honestly, their fear was more of the Terminator type, and we saw it happen. There was no moratorium, and nothing happened. But I mean, the word ratchet has negative connotations. Progress is a ratchet; it's a good ratchet. So if these things are irreversible, but they make us better off, then it's a good thing that they're irreversible.
So at the very beginning, I asked you, sort of what's the path through which we get into a situation where, we have a government which is AI controlled. What's the trajectory that we follow to get to that point, that impact point? And I think an interesting aspect of the story is that it's not at all clear what that path will be. So let me give you an example. When it comes to military hardware, I always had the idea or the understanding that what was going to happen is we were going to have information being sucked in about targets, for example, from various algorithms. And there's always going to be a human there in the loop, which is deciding whether, based on that information, whether to press the kill button. Right? But then you realize, if I give control, the AI is already 99% accurate. If I give it control, it can fire, a tenth of a second faster than my enemy can. So, it's accurate enough. I'm going to give it control of the kill switch or the kill button, right? So that was the picture that I always had of how AI was going to take over our military infrastructure. It's just, it does a better job. It's quicker. It's more efficient at killing our enemies. In practice, it looks like this isn't exactly the route that's being taken. So as far as I understand it, if you look at the conflict in Ukraine, what's rather happening is it's not a temporal distinction that's being made here. It's a spatial one. So you have these fixed lines of contact between Russia and Ukraine, and the Ukrainians, for example, know that on the other side of that line, it's just Russians. And in fact, that town is cleared of civilians. Anything that's there is going to be a target, right? And so you can say, move into that location and turn on your kill switch. Kill everything in sight. That's a very different path, right, to giving control to the machine, the kill switch. And it's not one that I imagined to start with. And so I think the interesting thing here, and the reason why people are worried, is it's not just that there are loads of unknown unknowns, but even if you know, even if you know there's a danger in the future, you don't know, it's unknown which path you're going to take to get there. And so I think there's a level of nuance there in the concerns that I find it hard to voice.
I mean, I've talked a lot of, sort of like DoD types over the years because, I've been funded by DARPA and other DoD agencies. And the picture that they've always had, at least in my time, of AI is a little bit different from the first one or even the second one. And it's one that I generally agree with, which is the two words that are always on their lips are situational awareness. AI will have many applications, but the single biggest application is to dispel the fog of war. It's like war is chaos. War is chaos. Like, it's the biggest chaos that anyone ever experiences, being in a war, right? And you make a lot of mistakes, often very, very costly ones, because of the fog. The promise of AI is that you have this, vast range of sensors and vast range of effectors, whether they're missile launchers or platoons of soldiers and whatnot, and is to have, again, a higher intelligence. Like, an army is like an organism, but right now the organism is a dinosaur, right? It's worse than a dinosaur, right? Like, the goal of AI, this goes by various names like networked warfare and like they're very good at lingo, but the goal is really like, you want AI to turn an army into a greater whole. Like I get all the sensors and I do all the targeting based on all the sensors and based on my decisions. And at the end of the day, those decisions are mine, the commanders. It's true, a lot of short-term decisions have to be made by the AI, or the useless because they kill you before you kill them, right? The dominant use of AI in Ukraine right now is, and again, it's very interesting to see this develop in real time, is that, pre-Iraq war, artillery and bombing were indiscriminate. In fact, what you're describing as the scenario in some ways is used to. I'm like the U.S. used more bombs on Iraq the first war than on World War II. This boggles the mind. Second Gulf War, they have these cheap things that they attach to bombs with lasers that allow you to target the bomb. It was something actually retrofit onto existing bombs, as a result of which the bombs could hit specific targets. This had a couple of different effects. One is that it cut down by a couple of orders of magnitude on the number of bombs that dropped, right? And it saved lives. Like the number of Iraqis killed in the Second War was a fraction. Apparently, right? I read this in the newspapers at the time. The Iraqis were going about their business in Baghdad, even as Baghdad was being bombed, because the U.S. dropped these leaflets saying, like, we're going to bomb the Ministry of Defense and these barracks and these barracks. And people were so confident that they would bomb that and nothing else that they went about their daily life. So this was, AI with, weapons with GPS or like very primitive intelligence. What is happening in Ukraine is that Russia can do something that Iraq couldn't do, which is it can jam the GPS, it can spoof the GPS, and make even like the missiles or the bombs or the artillery shells turn around and bomb the wrong thing. And the drones, right? The best example here is a drone, right? Like your drone, right now, the drones don't have a lot of AI. They're controlled by humans, but they're guided, by GPS. And what the reason, Ukraine is so big on AI right now is that the only solution is to have more onboard control. You need more AI on the drones, and literally, you need AI on the artillery shells, so that the artillery shell knows where it's going, even if the GPS isn't working, and despite the Russians' attempts to interfere, right? So this is actually what the future of AI is, actually having more intelligence that actually allows your warfare to be more discriminate, not less, right? The thing that drives me nuts about this analogy between AI and WMD is that AI is the polar opposite of a weapon of mass destruction. Weapons of mass destruction are evil because they kill everybody. AI is good because it's more discriminate about where it hits. Even in situations where you wouldn't see properly, you would be driven by fear and anger and confusion to make mistakes. The AI doesn't, or hopefully makes fewer mistakes.
I suppose it's a matter of application, though, right? I can imagine a situation in which there's a very wealthy nation that can mass produce drones, all equipped with AI, and they send them in a swarm to go depopulate an area and take over. I mean, I don't think this is realistic, of course, but you can imagine nightmare scenarios where this happens. And in that case, it does look a lot like a weapon of mass destruction, right?
Well, you know about neutron bombs, right? So if that's what you want, we already have neutron bombs to do that. Using AI is a complete waste if that's your goal. If your goal is to depopulate an area, just drop a neutron bomb there.
Except you irradiate the zone, right?
No.
I know that the modern weapons leave less of an impact in terms of radiation, but you still do leave that sort of.
No. The whole point of a neutron bomb is that it leaves it emits no radiation. It basically it just emits neutrons to kill people. And right after the people have all died, you can just go in there and live a normal life.
Oh, so then I don't know what we have.
This is not a generic nuclear weapon. It's a neutron bomb. It's a particular type of nuclear weapon that is designed to minimize blast, right? So there's no destruction. What it maximizes is the flood of neutrons, that just kills people, right? It's a type of radiation, right? But it doesn't stay in there for long or blah, blah, blah. So the city is intact, the people are all gone. You don't need AI for that. If what you want is
something like this.
Hmm?
I didn't know we had something like this.
No, it exists. And in fact, this was developed in the 70s. And then I think there had been whatever conventions banning it or something. I forget. But like this is a weapon that exists, but has not been made in large numbers because it's you can see why if there was going to be a nuclear arms treaty, you try to control that because it's particularly tempting to use such a weapon, right? AI is not. I mean, but I'll tell you what AI really is good for, right? Is like it's urban warfare, right? Urban warfare is hell. Nothing kills more soldiers than urban warfare. Like AI is perfect for urban warfare. Let me put it this way, right? If it's like I mean, honestly, I don't know why people have a hard time understanding this. Like, if we have an army of millions of drones, we could go and liberate Ukraine today at no cost to America except, the tax money. Why the hell wouldn't we do that? In the meantime, what you were just describing sounds a lot like what China has. China dominates the drone industry. They can manufacture more drones than America or all of NATO by, I don't know, an order of magnitude or two. They're going to send their swarm of drones into Taiwan, and who's going to stop them? The only thing that can stop a swarm of drones is a swarm of drones that's bigger and more functional. So we'd better hurry up and have them.
On that note, I should let you go. Thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is a great conversation.